Hello everyone. In this video we're going to be looking at raising property changed events manually for conditions where the event is not raised automatically. Let's take a look at our code that we're going to start with. So this is the app that we've been building over the past few videos, and we're working with here a collection of invoice items. And in the previous video we looked at different ways to edit and delete items out of this collection. Now, what I'm going to do to round out this page on the app is I want to add at the bottom a property that can be bound to our collection view model that allows us to see how many elements are in the collection. So at the bottom down here, we want to say count equals 3 at this point. If we delete one, we want that to get updated to say count equals 2. So I'm going to start by creating a new row with a label in it in our XAML page. So this page is currently set up to have 3 rows. The editing form here is in the first row 0. The collection view is in row 1. So in row 2, I'm going to create a label. And the purpose of this label is going to be to show us the count. So we'll create a label element here. Just have empty text for now. We're going to put it in grid row 2 and set some of the visual options. And I'm going to set the background color so that it really stands out nicely on our page, as well as some padding. So most of this is just visual settings, just to make it look nice and obvious and stand out. Now, for now, because the text is empty, we're really not going to see anything if we run the app at this point. So what I'm going to have for now is just a little placeholder that says count 0. And later on, we're going to change this 0, of course, to be bound to a property. So let's take a look at what we're looking at for this label. So here's the app, this label down here with the cornflower blue background where it says count 0. We want that number, that count value, to reflect how many elements are in our invoice list. So let's go behind to our collection view model. We want to create a new property that we can then data bind over to our XAML side. And it's going to be a calculated property that is a dependent property on our invoices collection. So I don't need to mark this as observable property. Remember, observable property is there to generate the code for a public property that automatically raises events. But for this one, we don't need any set. All we need is a get. We're going to have public int item count property. And the value for item count is going to be the count of how many records are in our invoices collection. So item count is the name of the property. Let's go back to our XAML page and bind our item count to this label. So here's the app displaying the count. You can see that it shows up as 3. If we look at our invoice collection view model, invoices.count is 3. This shows up as 3, looks great. The problem, however, is in raising the events. So if I were to delete an invoice or 2, you'll notice that our count is not being updated. Now this is a problem that we have come up against a few times before. The first time, a couple weeks ago, when we talked about dependent properties, the solution for notifying a dependent property was to use an annotation called notify property changed. So in the past, for dependent properties, we would put in notify property changed for, and then we could put in the name of the property. And if we try this with our item count, unfortunately, we'll see that it doesn't have much of an effect. So when our app's running, we've got our count as 3 to start, and we click on an X to delete one, but our item count property has not updated despite the fact that we've used notify property changed for. Now, if we want to do a little bit of investigation, let's put a breakpoint here on our delete method so that our app slows down and breaks. We can come in here and look at the values and see if they're being updated. Because one of the biggest issues when you're debugging these kind of MVVM applications is trying to figure out where exactly the problem is rooted. For example, if I'm deleting something and the 3 here isn't changing to a 2, there's a lot of potential causes for that. Maybe the delete isn't working. Maybe the delete is working, but the property just isn't getting updated. Maybe the property is getting updated, but the data binding isn't working, so the UI is the one that's not getting updated. There's a lot of potential problems. And one of the ways to solve it is just to break the program with a breakpoint and come in here and check our local variables to see which variable is the culprit. So in this case, we're going to be looking for changes to item count when I click on the delete button here. So whenever I click on a delete button, our program comes in here to the delete method, and I can look in my locals down at the bottom. If we go into this page, I can take a look at item count, and item count is currently 2, despite the fact that our app is showing the item count as 3. If I just bring this over here, we can see 3 in the item count. And as I step through and I remove a value from the invoice, you can see that the item count property did get updated. So it's the UI that's not responding. And when the UI isn't responding, typically it's because some event is not being raised when it should be. Now, notify property changed for is a way of raising the on property changed event for an item when some condition happens. And in this case, when we put it on an observable property, the condition that has to happen in order for the property changed method to execute is that this thing gets reassigned. So if I had said invoices equals new observable collection, like we do here in the constructor, that invokes the set block of our invoices property, and that would notify the property has changed. However, we never reassign invoices. For example, in our delete, this does not reassign invoices to a new collection. Therefore, the property changed event is not being raised. When you make a change to an existing collection, the event that gets raised for that is a collection changed event. It's not a property changed, it's a collection changed. So it would be really great if we had an annotation called notify collection changed. However, as you can see, that's not an option. The observable object that we're using from our MVVM toolkit is pretty powerful, but it doesn't contain annotations for every possible outcome. So it won't work for us to try to use an annotation to raise an event when a collection changes. So if we want something to happen, for example, this to be reevaluated when the collection changes, we're going to have to manually subscribe to that collection changed event on our invoices collection. So what that means is whenever our collection changes, we also want to raise the collection changed event along with the property changed event for the item count property. So I'm going to subscribe an event handler here for collection changed. My invoices collection changed event. When it happens, we're also going to run this method. So this method, I've just used the tab button to automatically generate it. It's an event handler method that contains a set of collection changed event args. So you can write this manually, or we can put a using statement up here to shorten this up a little, or we can just do a random set of event args if we're not using any of the specialized arguments. But that's the type of event handler that it makes, where we've got arguments here that give us information about the collection and the way that it changed. For example, what were the old values, what were the new values, what kind of a change it was. You can find out whether it was an insert or a remove or an add, for example. So what we want to do is when this invoices collection has changed, we want to raise another event. The event that we want to raise here is on property changed. And in this case, we want to say that item count property will change. So we're adding this event handler as a response to the invoices collection changed. So this is kind of the long version of doing that, but there is also a short form that we'll take a look at. So instead of writing this method, we can put an anonymous method in here instead. Now I'm going to just comment this out so that we can see both of these possibilities. But ultimately I'm going to stick with the shorter version because it's a little bit more efficient that we don't have to define a named method just for this one specific case. So I'm going to say we start off the same, invoices collection changed. And we're going to make an anonymous method for the sender and the event args. And because there's only one line of code in here, we can use an expression bodied format that says on property changed for item count. So now because we're using the anonymous method, we don't need to write the separate event handler and then invoke the method inside. This replaces all of that code. So it's a much shorter and more efficient little solution, but both of them ultimately do the exact same thing. So once we've got this piece in here and specify that when our collection changes, we're also going to invoke this method here that raises the property changed event for item count, raising that property changed event, because we know that the property does get updated. Item count did go from 3 to 2 to 1. The property did change. What didn't happen was raising the event notification. So the UI didn't see it. And this is the piece that we were missing. On property changed raises that event for this property. So that's when the UI event listeners say, hey, that property changed. Let's display its current value. Let's retrieve it again and refresh it. So we'll just run it to make sure that that's working. And then we'll wrap up. So here's our app when it first loads. And as we remove values from our invoice list, you can see now that our item count is remaining up to date. Whenever the collection changes, item count has the notification that it has changed as well. Now the very last thing that I'm going to do is just clean up that user interface a little bit. Rather than just showing a 0, we're going to add a little bit of a template here so that we can control the string format of this. So I'm going to add a string format. Use single quotes. Visual Studio likes to insert the word empty there, but we don't want it to be empty. What we want it to say is the word count followed by the actual value. So inside a string format, the value that you're trying to show ends up here. A 0 inside the braces, that represents where the value goes. If you want to put a different format string on the value, for example, if this was a currency, we could put a colon and put C2, or we could put N2 if we want 2-digit places. But for this, it's just an int, so we can keep it just as a regular whole number. And we'll have the word count showing up before the number. So that doesn't change the functionality of how anything works. It literally just changes the output and how it looks. But it gives us a little bit more information as to what we're looking at, wondering why that 3 is there. Now we know it's because we have 3 invoices, and it continues to decrease every time we delete them. So I hope you guys found this video informative and helpful. And if you have any questions about it, make sure that you send me an email or catch up with me in class. Until next time, enjoy coding and have a great day.